Story 1. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Jesus. Story 2. On r/Catholicism, there is obviously an outage. I was surprised by how many are angry that he met the former pope, then fell asleep at the funeral and is now apparently reveling in the opportunity to joke about it. This is a fairly major talking point that I had missed, and it turned my stomach. It is offensive on a human level. He disrespected the man at his funeral and is now doing it again within a fortnight. It isn't just strict Catholics who are upset, although they are rightfully so in my opinion. Atheists and former Catholics are also chiming in on many threads, claiming to be offended. There is a general undertone that he is just offensive in everything he does, highlighting his increasing megalomania. Story 3. The Catholicism subreddit has shut down any and all shares of this image. The moderators say very little about it other than it cannot be posted on the subreddit. I am Catholic and see Trump as a tutti-frutti nutcake, so it just seems like more of the same from him. Story 4. My very Catholic extended family will be over today. I will show them it and ask them. Update. First person. That is so uncouth and entirely disrespectful. He is such a vile human. Story 5. This is the behavior that the Bible describes as characteristic of the Antichrist. It is also the type of behavior that Jesus confronted with a bullwhip in the temple, which ultimately led to his crucifixion. People who claim to be Christians or Catholics but are blindly loyal to this chaos do not follow the teachings of Christ. I cannot understand how these individuals fail to see the very things their holy book warns them about. Story 6. In essence, the false prophet is a powerful figure of deception who uses religious appearances and miracles to lead people into worshiping the Antichrist and receiving its mark, ultimately leading them to eternal damnation. This mark was generally worn on the forehead, reminiscent of a hat. Story 7. It is heresy, and any person who claims to love the Bible and Jesus Christ while also supporting and idolizing Trump is a lost soul. Story 8. There's a level of this person is a bad person that can be crossed, and no new information changes that. Trump crossed that threshold years ago. Now it's all just evidence he's not actually trying to be better. My faith has taught me not to believe there's no redeeming some people, but I also believe you need to want to be redeemed. Story 9. Thou shalt not worship false idols. He usually rings a bell, but I feel as though they have filled it with cotton at this point. Story 10. As an Italian non-Catholic living in Rome, I can tell you that this has been perceived very negatively by many people in Italy and across Europe. We may be an old country, but certain traditions and forms of respect are still considered important. I don't think this kind of move will do Trump any favors regarding international perception. Story 11. I am a Catholic physician who loves my neighbors of all faiths and those who lack faith. I cried in 2016 when he was elected because I feared him and his policies. I have patients in my clinic who are crying about their safety and the possibility of being deported to places they have never lived. I'm not surprised by his overwhelming narcissism given his history, but the fact that any Christian can support him, despite his blatant disregard for respect and his failure to embody the values that Jesus teaches, reflects a failure of evangelical morality and the United States educational system. Story 12. If Obama or Biden had done it, right-wing Catholics would have been hysterical with righteous indignation. Story 13. As a former Catholic, I would have been deeply bothered by this when I was still practicing. I am perplexed by the lack of outrage from devout Catholics. Now, I just see him as a clown. Story 14. As a former Catholic, I am greatly offended by this. Despite my lack of faith, I still believe in the core tenet of Christianity, which is to love your neighbor. This piece is as far from that as one can get. Story 15. I have seen two responses. 1. Those who dislike Trump find it insulting. Supporters of Trump dismiss it as just a joke. The latter exhausts me because it is always a joke until it isn't. Consider tariffs, mass deportations, the destruction of the federal government, and defunding critical social programs. Story 16. My husband predicted it. When Francis passed, I mused, I bet Donald Trump tries to pick the next pope. And he said, yeah, he would be his own pick. Story 17. I am disgusted. He is the least religious person alive. Can you imagine anyone else doing this? It's appalling. He can pay for it in hell. Story 18. With all the lying, threatening, and boasting coming from the White House on a daily basis, I find this mildly enraging, to be honest. I wish to God this was the worst nonsense that Trump has put out there. Story 19. Catholic here. The separation of church and state must be maintained. Anyone who suggests that Catholicism should influence American law is an extremist cult follower. Story 20. When the Pope died, I jokingly said, how is Trump going to handle two jobs, being a president and the Pope? Boy, did I get downvoted. Story 21. I grew up Catholic and can confirm that it is blatantly disrespectful and blasphemous. It is amazing how many Christians fell in love with the physical embodiment of a biblical Antichrist. Story 22. First of all, he is not Catholic, so it would be impossible. True Catholics, although I consider myself a bad Catholic, have been attending Mass for 40 years and would reject everything Trump represents and see through his lies. We are supposed to be anti-violence, pro-charity, and treat others as we would like to be treated. We should embrace the less fortunate and welcome them, treating visitors better than we treat ourselves. Anyone who believes he would be a good candidate for Pope or even a good Christian is a hypocrite. I have begun distancing myself from such individuals. If you are not paying attention to the 10 Commandments, you are supposed to honor God above all things. That is the first commandment. They worship one thing, money. If you follow the Catholic faith, you know that all those who idolize Trump are headed to a troubling place. Story 23. Personally, I believe the president of any country trolling is undignified. This is a prime example of behavior that prevents many Americans and others around the world from taking this man seriously. He is a joke, and a bad one at that. Story 24. Does the average American realize just how chaotic their entire country appears right now? Story 25. It makes me ill. I was raised Catholic, and that image is not funny to me at all. Being a pope means caring for the poor and the sick. It means speaking out when people are attacked. Story 26. They did what? I googled to confirm the original poster is correct. Oh my goodness, what is wrong with these people? And yet, somehow, Sinead O'Connor tearing up a picture of the Pope still makes her the worst person according to some people. Story 27. Do you recall the outrage from Republicans about Clinton? It seems like an eternity ago that they expressed concern about ethics. What they really cared about was controlling the narrative and getting the media to bend to their preferred agenda while yelling about a liberal bias. They portrayed themselves as victims, and now they can't stop. They always see themselves as the victim. Story 28. I am not a Catholic, but I will respond as an American taxpayer. I am frustrated with my government using my tax dollars to target anyone who is not a supporter of that movement. I am tired of them catering to an uneducated, narcissistic, convicted felon who should be in prison, not in the White House. Story 29. I don't feel anything. As others have said, it's all for attention and to get people talking about this instead of our Constitution being torn apart and our country being run by a dictator. Story 30. Cradle Catholic, liberal member of the family, hasn't practiced in years but admires Pope Francis a lot. It's ridiculous. It should upset my very conservative family, but they will find a way to dismiss it like everything else since 2015 with their support for Trump. Story 31. Any Catholic who supports Trump conveniently ignores the fact that he is essentially the opposite of a true Christian in his behavior and how he has lived his entire life. Therefore, it doesn't really matter what he does at this point. Story 32. I am accustomed to being disappointed by the current administration. However, I am relieved that canon law exists, as he cannot ever become pope due to at least 5 violations. Popes are historically celibate, not permitted to hold political office, and must partake in the sacramental wine in the Catholic tradition. Trump contradicts all 5 of these requirements. Story 33. I'm not religious at all, but this is very disrespectful, especially coming from the official White House account. Perhaps lightning will strike, I can only hope. Story 34. I grew up Catholic but am not now. I am absolutely baffled by the signs of him being the Antichrist. I don't believe in anything anymore, but comparing Trump to the signs of the Antichrist is just wild. Story 35. He is profaning the most sacred position in the Catholic Church with his heresy. You can assume that every Catholic is disconcerted by the implication that Donald Trump is worthy of St. Peter's throne and is a successor to Pope Francis, who was a consummate pope. I don't know what is more dismaying, his arrogance or his supporters leonizing such narcissism. I do not care what they say, but anyone who reveres Trump cannot be a follower of Christ because they are the antithesis of each other. Story 36. Catholic or not, everyone should be disgusted by this. Just because it is Trump who did it does not mean he should get a free pass. If John F. Kennedy or Joe Biden tried this, they would be calling for their heads. Actions like this only lower the discourse even further, if that is possible. Story 37. It's disrespectful. I know he's just trying to provoke a reaction, but he should have some respect for your office and that of the papacy. In short, I think he's being highly inappropriate. Story 38. American Catholics who accept this are part of a cult. At some point, a line must be drawn, and if this isn't it, I don't know what is. Story 39. It's unpleasant and offensive. I didn't know I could dislike Trump and the Make America Great Again movement more than I already did. Can you imagine if any other sitting president in the last 50 years had done this? Story 40. Both of my parents are the most devout Catholics I know, and I assume they will both pretend to be outraged and then vote for him a fourth time. Story 41. If Trump were the Pope, his first actions would be to make Hitler and Mussolini saints. Then he would make Putin a cardinal. So that sums it up. He is a devil. Story 42. He could put himself on the cross, saying, "This is what the Democrats and their radical agenda want to do to me." Some of his supporters would love it, while the rest would pretend to be apathetic but would actually enjoy upsetting those they dislike. Story 43. I was raised Catholic. It's not that it offends me, but don't people want a serious president of the United States? When did it become a government of memes, artificial intelligence, and satirical posters? It's embarrassing. It's disrespectful to joke about serious matters when the country is in shambles. Story 44. Pope Francis has called for a global treaty to regulate artificial intelligence, emphasizing the need for ethical development and use of these technologies. Story 45. He is blasphemous, and we knew that, so nothing will happen. I and many others begged Americans not to vote for this person, but many in the Catholic community called us lost souls because they felt voting on a single issue is better than voting for the greater good or the lesser of two evils. This man proved to be a liar, scamp, and abuser who is not against anything. Rather, he is for himself. Then we voted him in a second time. Since we, as a country, voted him in and this administration has already done a slew of disgraceful things, I suspect no one will stand up to change this recent blasphemous act. It is unfortunate, but it seems to be the will of many in the United States to want what his faction is serving. Story 46. I like the idea of him being behind a saint more. Someone else suggested making him Saint Cupid, which would be great. Story 47. I was raised Roman Catholic. My Catholic family dislikes him. Actual religious people who genuinely adhere to their beliefs dislike Trump and see him as a fraud. It is the less devout Protestants who support him. Story 48. I firmly believe he is an agent of the Antichrist, and this has not changed my mind. Or he is an uninformed elderly man with a fragile ego. Story 49. It is not a great blasphemy. I want to see Donald Trump as the Prophet Muhammad. That is when the real show starts. Story 50. If I were at the Vatican and witnessed that, I would tell him to pack his things and go home. He is no longer allowed to be at the Pope's funeral. Although I am not Catholic, that is what I would do if I were one and present there. Story 51. His behavior is abhorrent but not surprising. Therefore, I am more shocked and disgusted that Republican Catholics like J.D. Vance and the rest of the righteous Republicans are not demanding an apology. However, I suppose their silence is also expected. Story 52. They will say, "It's just a joke," just as they have said about everything else he has done. Self-gaslighting is an actual psychological term. Story 53. As a spiritualist with a strong fondness for the Catholic Church, there is no way that this individual should be allowed in a church that advocates for the poor. Story 54. He is not Catholic and is ineligible. If an ordinary person did it, or even Donald Trump as a private citizen, then that is acceptable. However, it should not come from an official channel. Story 55. It is absolutely sacrilege and blasphemous. I am curious to hear any serious Catholic provide a viable defense other than, "It's just a joke," or "He sure triggered the liberals." If anyone wants to enlighten me, I am listening. Story 56. Will that image have any effect on the conservative Catholic members of the United States Supreme Court? I hope it opens their eyes to how misguided they are in perverting the Constitution. Story 57. It amazes me how some people believe the world revolves around them. The former president has been criticized for his controversial views and policies. Many Catholics do not support him. God bless the Pope. Story 58. I believe it is in poor taste and disrespectful. What the current occupant of the White House represents is the polar opposite of what the Holy Father and the Vatican represent. Story 59. Not a Catholic, but my conservative Catholic friends and family are all upset about it. They went from being very supportive to expressing their frustration quickly. Story 60. I want to ask my father, who attends weekly Sunday Mass and is a Knight of Columbus, about the image. He was very upset about the Da Vinci Code, so I would imagine he should be quite offended, except he supports Donald Trump. Story 61. I feel close to my faith and deeply loved what Pope Francis stood for. Catholic social teaching, humanism, justice, inclusion, and compassion. He modeled faithful service and a beloved community. It pains me and angers me to see Trump mock what Pope Francis symbolizes. At the same time, Trump is so insignificant in my eyes that he presents no threat or stain to Pope Francis' legacy and memory. Pope Francis reminded us that the goal of human history is to be in community. He took the name of Saint Francis, the patron saint of animals. He was love and light. No man in any costume can touch that. Story 62. A non-Catholic married into a Catholic family. Beyond being offensive and disrespectful, it is simply unwise. He is a world leader. This is the White House. Why are they wasting time and energy creating and promoting this trivial matter? This is unprofessional. True professionals do not engage in such foolish, offensive antics for attention. They should feel embarrassed, but unfortunately, it aligns with their consistent tone-deaf behavior. Story 63. Being a Catholic with a good sense of humor, I still find it offensive. The executive office in America is a worldwide, troubling joke. Story 64. When John F. Kennedy was running, some people were seriously concerned that, as a Catholic, if he won, he would listen to the Pope over the American people. The same individuals who 60 years ago would have claimed that was a legitimate reason not to vote for Kennedy are now supporting this. Regarding the actual question, my Catholic in-laws seem to dislike the idea, but primarily on the grounds of he's not qualified rather than anything else. Story 65. I was raised Catholic and have since stopped practicing. I still consider God as a higher power that humans are unable to fully comprehend. I don't have much knowledge about how popes are selected, but I understand they are the ultimate intermediary between God and humanity. Unfortunately, the Church has been tainted since the 1300s when clergy began to prioritize money and power. Popes, like any other human, are imperfect beings. However, I believe the general rule is that you're allowed to have a history, but you must have a good heart. Generating an artificial intelligence image of a rapist, a pedophile, a womanizing misogynist, and a deeply corrupt individual in papal attire is outright disrespectful to the entire Catholic Church. Anyone who sees that and thinks anything but disgust needs to seriously reevaluate their beliefs and their relationship with God. Pope Francis was one of the most progressive popes the Church has seen, and I sincerely hope the Church continues to move in a direction of love for one another. These individuals claim to love Jesus, yet they completely ignore his message. God help us all. Amen. Story 66. Practicing Catholic, Democrat voting for Harris. This is standard. Trump is not a leader, he is a criminal and a thug. It is unfortunate that 77 million Americans were misled. Story 67. This isn't the first sacrilegious act he has committed that shows he has no faith himself. I have never understood how any Christian could believe that individual is also a Christian. He has never performed an action that led me to believe he was religious in any way, let alone a Christian. Additionally, he doesn't associate much with Catholics. His relationship with Giuliani appears to be one of convenience. Furthermore, his father was arrested with his KKK associates for beating Catholics in the street. I have always suspected he holds anti-Catholic views as well. Story 68. I'm not Catholic, but this is openly and blatantly offensive. Another successful effort by Trump and his supporters to turn the United States into a clown country. Story 69. Catholicism blocked any conversation about it. I feel like many Trump supporters who are also Catholics are more loyal to the president than they are to God. So I'm sure many of them will try to make excuses for him or say, it was a joke. The Bible does say that many people will join the Antichrist during Revelation. I think more Christians need to read their Bibles. Story 70. I believe the conclave has the opportunity to do something amusing and name Joe Biden as Pope. Story 71. Trump is neither Catholic nor affiliated with a specific Christian group. He is intentionally distracting the media with this kind of news rather than focusing on his policies, such as the trade war. People should have learned from his first term that he often makes outrageous statements. Story 72. The Catholicism subreddit deleted a post I made asking the same question. As an American Catholic, I am sick to my stomach. Not only is this individual rude, but now he believes he should be the representative of God on earth. Based on what? He is the exact opposite of what Catholics and Christians are supposed to be. He is the Antichrist. His following, which includes many Catholics, won't do anything about it. I would like to think he is crazy, but I really don't think so. He is so narcissistic and self-absorbed that he believes everything he says. Story 73. Catholic here. Sure, it's heretical and offensive, but no one was actually hurt by this, which to me puts it behind hundreds of other truly deplorable things he has done that have caused actual suffering. I will direct my anger at those in the first instance and worry about the manipulated images later. Story 74. I am no longer a practicing Catholic, but culturally I will always identify as Catholic. It is disgusting. I am angry and particularly frustrated with those Catholics who continue to support him and encourage this behavior. It reflects behaviors that are contrary to Christian values. Story 75. As a former Catholic, I believe any Catholic would immediately reject that idea. The Pope is the most honored role in the Church and is considered the closest to God that any human can attain. Therefore, having someone who has not dedicated decades to the study of Catholicism pretend to qualify for the highest position in the faith would be seen as extremely offensive. Story 76. When it was just on Trump's account, it was certainly terrible, in poor taste, and incredibly misguided. However, the same can be said for the entirety of his account and himself, of course. But when it is on the official White House account, if there was ever a shred of professionalism or dignity left in the White House after the chaotic Trump administration, it is entirely gone now. The White House has officially established itself as a frat house. Story 77. He is not a religious person. He attended the ceremony for publicity. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is Jewish and did not have to be there, but he still showed up and demonstrated more respect than Donald Trump. As a Catholic, I cannot support anything Trump does. He represents the opposite of everything Catholicism stands for. With all due respect, I disagree with Trump and the self-proclaimed Catholic Republicans. No true Christian or Catholic would behave this way. Story 78. Not a Catholic, but I feel it is necessary to point out that Trump would be in prison right now if not for all the help he received from far-right Catholics on the Supreme Court. Of the 6 Catholics on the court, only one, Sonia Sotomayor, is on the liberal side. The other 5 are Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. The remaining right-wing justice, Neil Gorsuch, was raised Catholic but attends an Episcopal church. For those keeping score, the Episcopal Church is very nearly the American version of the Anglican Church in the UK, to which the royal family belongs. The Anglican Church still resembles Catholic doctrine and writes so closely that, not very many years ago, its leaders agreed with the Vatican that members of one sect could take communion with the other. I wouldn't necessarily object to a majority of the court all going to the same church if they were honest interpreters of a secular constitution and not dominated by corrupt authoritarians, but here we are. Story 79. As a Catholic, I find it troubling on multiple levels. Regardless of political leanings, depicting any political figure as the Pope, especially using artificial intelligence, can come off as disrespectful to the sacredness of the papacy. It is shameful. The Pope is a spiritual leader for over 1 billion people and not a symbol to be politicized or used for satire by a government office. Even if it was meant as a joke or commentary, it crosses a line between politics and religion that deserves more care and respect. This kind of image risks trivializing the faith and fueling unnecessary division. Someone should speak seriously to the person who posted it. It is not funny at all. Story 80. I find it disappointing. He is mocking the Catholic faith as we prepare for the conclave and the election of the next pope. He believes everything is about political power and control, but the modern papacy represents a type of power he cannot understand. It is about winning hearts to Christ and guiding the Church through the Holy Spirit. I have expressed this before and will say it again. The actions of President Trump are concerning. He is leading many people astray. Story 81. I'm hopeful that my fellow Catholics who have supported him, largely due to his current pro-life stance, will realize how destructive he is for humanity. Story 82. From across the pond, it is somewhat amusing to watch him slowly but surely frustrate everyone. At this rate, there may not be a group left. I keep hearing him compared to Hitler, but honestly, I think a better comparison is Caligula. If he decided to wage war against the sea, I wouldn't be surprised. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.